Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. And my apologies for running a little bit late. As all things technology, we were experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm very glad for you to be here and excited for this program today. I hope you and your loved ones are well. My name is Tracy Lamb. I am the Director of Programs and Communications for Partners in Diversity. Thank you for choosing to be with us here today, this early. There I am. Today's Breakfast for Champions is the first in a series of Partners in Diversity programs dedicated to helping you, our members, navigate through our recent health, economic, and social crises with an equity lens. Our topic today is moving beyond a company statement and into action with Dr. Michael McAfee of PolicyLink. First, a few housekeeping items. Feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself and connect with other attendees. We have a few hundred people on the call with us today, and there will be plenty of time for Q&A with Dr. McAfee after his statements, his initial remarks. So please use the Q&A box specifically for questions directed to Dr. McAfee. So again, only the Q&A box will be monitored for questions for Dr. McAfee. And this session is being recorded and will be sent to attendees after the event. Though we can't meet in person today, we would still love to stay in touch and hear from you. So please connect with us on social media. And as I mentioned, this is part of a series of programs dedicated to recovery. And we'd like to invite you to some of our upcoming events in August. August 12th, we have the Equity Conversations on Bias in Hiring. And that is sponsored by Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. We will take a look at ways to identify and mitigate unconscious bias to ensure an equitable hiring process. On August 26th, we have another Breakfast for Champions. This one is focusing on using data to advance equity. And this one is sponsored by Northwest Natural. It focuses on how leaders can take data and to inform equitable policymaking and looks at ways to implement race-conscious approaches. The membership liaisons from each of your organizations will be receiving information about these programs. I hope to see you all there. And now I would like to introduce to you the Executive Director of Partners in Diversity, Mari Watanabe.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, and again, apologies for the technical difficulties, but we're very glad you're here. And I'm pleased to see so many of you here. So it's great to see all your names popping up in the chat box. Wish it could be in person. As I look back at the last 4 months, the events of the world has brought me both sadness, but hope and hope. The recent incidences, the racial disparities exacerbated by COVID-19, and the deaths of Black Americans have furthered my resolve in Partners in Diversity's mission. I'm also hoping that many people, including those of you who are on this call today, are rising up with the requisite courage to do something about the systems, policies, and practices that have led to the oppression of our fellow community members. Broken economic systems that underpay people for honest work, hiring practices that continue to bias applicants, housing discrimination due to unequal access to capital, and the legacy of redlining are just a few things we must work to fix immediately. What we do from this day forward is a reflection of our character and our organization's values. Since March, Partners in Diversity has more than tripled our online programs to help employers enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. In addition to our regular programs, we recently released our year-long study on diversity retention. If you joined us last week for the release of this work, you know the findings were sober, and they reveal the level of discrimination that professionals of color deal with every day at work and in the community. If you have not had a chance to, if you didn't attend the release last week, I encourage you to go to our website to read the report, and also our YouTube channel if you would like to hear the recording, which included a panel of 3 CEOs talking about how they have made their workplace more inclusive. So today's Breakfast for Champion is made possible by the support of members like you and the generous sponsorship of Cambia Health Solutions. Joining us from Cambia is Janet Campbell, Vice President and Chief of Staff. Janet?
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if I'm on video yet. Let's see, there we go. Technology. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Mari. Thank you, Partners in Diversity. And of course, our guest speaker, Dr. Michael McAfee. I was part of the crowd that tuned in to listen to the Retention Project. And that was a very generous, I would say, effort to help us all begin to understand what's before us when it comes to the hiring and retaining practices of employment within the Portland area. I've been at Cambia for over 10 years, and I was drawn to Cambia Health Solutions because it's a company that's acting on its mission to transform healthcare for people and their families. As you all know, the realities of working in healthcare over the last few months have been sobering. And this pandemic has now killed more than 100,000 Americans, with a lot of statistics that confirmed our worst fears. And it has disproportionately impacted communities of color, really at an astonishing scale. And that's hard, even for me as a woman of color, to see the impact of what's going on. It's given rise to social and economic turmoil. It's put millions of people out of work and exposing racism as a public health crisis that must be addressed. It's a turning point for all of us and a call to action that must not fade away. Access to healthcare that is person-focused and economically sustainable and inclusive is one of the most pressing social justice issues of our time, and we must take action. We must move forward with compassion, humility, and a deep commitment to learning and doing what is necessary for system change to occur. We must invest in the work to move towards an equitable society, and organizations like Cambia, and the foundation has donated over $15 million to improve equity over the past 10 years. That has helped, but there's still much more to do. We must commit to create work environments that are innovative, that are diverse, that are inclusive, and remember, our openness to new ideas and the needs of different types of consumers will really determine our ability to thrive in the future. We must challenge ourselves and not shy away from uncomfortable conversations as we commit to our own role as a company and our responsibility in creating lasting change. I just believe that, the conversations like we're gonna have today will help shape a just and inclusive culture. I am really excited today to hear our guest speaker who will be talking to us about how we can move beyond a company statement to action. Thank you, Mari.
Thank you, Janet and Cambia, for your continued commitment to equity and inclusion. So I've been looking forward to today's Breakfast for Champions for quite some time, and it comes at a poignant moment in our history. This month marks the 7th anniversary of the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot has changed in those 7 years. A New York Times article on July 3rd had the incredible headline, "Black Lives Matters may be the largest movement in US history." It had a map that marked the 550 cities where protests took place on June 6th at the height of the protests. The article estimated that the number of people protesting in the United States over the past several weeks at anywhere from 15 million to 26 million. That's roughly 6 to 10% of all adults in the United States. This means, chances are, you know someone who took part in a Black Lives Matter protest. I'm sure many of you on this call did. How do you translate that energy on the street to the workplace or boardroom? Shortly after George Floyd's death, many companies issued statements that called for justice and talked about their organization's commitment to equity. So now that the wheels of change are in motion. What's next? To help us on our journey and guide us on the path of equity, we are honored today to have Dr. Michael McAfee. Dr. McAfee is the president and CEO of PolicyLink, a national research and action institute that seeks to advance racial and economic equality. During his time at PolicyLink, he helped secure Promised Neighborhoods as a permanent federal program, led efforts to improve outcomes for more than 300,000 children, and facilitated the investment of billions of dollars in neighborhoods with concentrated poverty. He is the catalyst for a new and growing body of work called Corporate Racial Equity, which includes the first comprehensive tool to guide private sector companies in assessing and actively promoting equity in every aspect of their company's value chain. Prior to PolicyLink, Dr. McAfee worked for the Chicago Regional Office of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. He served in the U.S. Army and earned his Doctor of Education in Human and Organizational Learning from George Washington University. Dr. McAfee's list of accomplishments is long. If I were to go through all of them, it would take the rest of the time. So I'm going to encourage you to visit PolicyLink's website to learn more about Dr. McAfee and the organization's work. There will be plenty of time to ask Dr. McAfee questions, so please post your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, the Q&A box. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael McAfee.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be in your space this morning. So deep sense of gratitude for one, I'm holding your family in my prayers for them to remain safe and healthy. And I'm deeply grateful for all that you're doing to help this nation recover. So it's with that humility that I'm entering this space. My tone may sound like I'm absolute in what I'm saying, but I want you to know that I'm on my own racial equity journey as well. There's a lot of work that I still need to do. And so I'm not absolute at all, but I do have enough common sense to know that there are some things that we must do. And I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about what I have seen in this country, having been on the road for the past 9 years, probably about 60% of the time. And I want to help you understand some possibilities about how to make sense of this moment. As I'm talking, you may want to try to situate what I'm saying on the political spectrum, and I would invite you to not do that. I find the political spectrum to be irrelevant in this moment and quite toxic. I'm having a results-based conversation with you. I'm having a conversation with you about what do you want this nation to be? And we can't answer that question if we are cemented on the left or the right of the political spectrum or in the middle. And so that is not my interest. I'm not trying to proselytize. I'm holding the interest of all in our definition. Our definition of equity says that we want to create a world that is just and fair, in which all can participate, prosper, and reach that full potential. And so when I'm talking about equity, I'm going to talk about why it's important to center Blackness to get to the all. But I want you to make sure that you're always hearing that the path forward is for equity is to not diminish anybody's life, but finally realize the promise of that definition. And so I'm going to start there. I think when you think about what this moment is, it is a moment that it has been coming since our founding. And until we can honestly acknowledge and reconcile a couple of truths about our founding as a nation, it's really hard to move forward. And this is part of the reason why people who have been oppressed are angry. It's because that reality has been denied. And so I'm going to start there and move forward. This nation was revolutionary in its founding. It broke away from a government that didn't work for its people, who oppressed its people. And it came to a new land, and in many ways, it replicated that same oppression. The nation is founded on genocide, stolen land, and slave labor. Now, those things may be hard for us to hear, but they are truths. They are truths. And I want you to ask yourself this question. If a nation is successful at constructing itself to be a world superpower off of slavery, off of stolen land and genocide, first, what does that mean for our institutions? What's in the DNA of our institutions, if that is a fact? What's in the DNA of our institutions? What is in the DNA of how we've been socialized? What is in the DNA of our bodies, given all that we know about the epigenetics of stress, all that we're learning about toxic stress? And ultimately, the question that we don't have an answer for, if you were maximally successful at that, how many generations does it take to reverse that? How much money does it take to reverse that? Many of us will say, well, you know, that was 400 years ago. We should just stop it. Women have the right to vote. LGBTQ folks can get married. Black folks got civil rights. What's the problem? Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that when Dr. King says the arc of the moral universe is long and bends towards justice, I don't know if that is true if we don't do some different type of revolutionary work. And the reason why I say that is because, yes, our society has made progress, no doubt. But there are still 100 million plus in this nation who are economically insecure. That's 1 in 3 people in America who are economically insecure. 26% of that population is white. And so when I'm talking to you, I'm holding that number, that more than 100 million folks in America who are struggling, who are actually working 2 jobs and still struggling. And I'll give you a really good example. I live in the Bay region in California. Of 1,500 neighborhoods, only 5% of them are affordable to a family that's working 2 jobs at minimum wage. That's not sustainable. And so what I'm trying to signal to you is that there is a design treatment in this nation that we've not tended to. And we thought it could just go away, much like we think sometimes that that COVID-19 will just go away. If we wish it away, if we just ignore it, if we just fight amongst ourselves and never tend to the fundamental reason of the challenge that is in front of us. Well, the issue of structural racism, white supremacy, anti-Black racism is alive and well in our institutions. It's alive and well in the architecture of our legal and regulatory framework. And you don't have to look that far back to see that that is still true. You just saw the Supreme Court give land back to our indigenous brothers and sisters in Oklahoma who've been fighting for years. You just saw a legal finding in the Dakotas where our indigenous brothers and sisters were fighting to make sure that we weren't extracting from their land with the Dakota pipeline. You've seen recently large banks be slapped on the hand for still redlining and using extractive practices. If you read the Ferguson report, you see where municipalities have chosen to not raise taxes, but to enact an elegant design of fines and fees that over-penalize poor people, where it becomes basically a crime to be poor. You can go around counties around this country and you can see people sitting in jail simply because they can't post bond for years. This is not an artifact of 400 years ago. It is an artifact, it is a legacy of 400 years ago, but it's alive and well today. And the tragedy of it being alive and well today is that a society that was designed to oppress people of color now has become too toxic for much of white America. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can read books like Dying of Whiteness, which lays out really the diseases of despair the health challenges that are a result of living in a toxic society right now. You can read Democracy and Change and begin, or The Color of Law, and begin to see this legal architecture laid out that I'm talking about, that has designed everything from the way our schools work, et cetera, to where our housing patterns are. And it is even playing out in this pandemic. If you look at the redlining maps, you look at the poverty maps, you look at where frontline workers live, and then you overlay who's being infected by COVID-19, you often see that those maps, those overlays line up perfectly. And so I wanted to start here because this design treatment has been stubborn, enduring, and highly effective. And in many ways now, in this moment, corporate America is at the leading edge of the equity movement, whether we like it or not. And they're at the edge of the equity movement because they have a skill set that is uniquely suited for this moment. And that skill set is the ability to bend the legal and regulatory framework of this nation. To bend the legal and regulatory framework of this nation so that it works for them. And quite frankly, that's what we need right now. The alleviation of immediate human need, which I call charity, is absolutely needed. But charity does not earn us the right to ask for a return on investment or to expect that on so many of those the indicators, those social determinants of health, that they would be going in the right direction. And so what I want you to begin to think about is, are we structuring our interventions, our solutions to actually win on equity to where we can expect the trend line to be going in the right direction? In many cases, we are not. Flint is a perfect example. Instead of fixing the pipes, we're passing out water bottles. Yet kids are still taking showers, and the largest organ on their body is still causing them to be poisoned. And we'll turn around and blame the nonprofit sector in a few years because those kids are having trouble with third grade reading scores, math proficiency, etc. And I'm trying to show you how the design treatment of simply making a decision not to treat the pipes for those people is now poisoning a generation. And while we might high five and think that passing out water bottles is great, and it is, it doesn't fundamentally solve the systemic problem that those families in Flint and so many other cities around this country are facing. That is a real example of the persistence of structural problems and our feckless desire to want to do something about it. And so that is why people are frustrated right now, because this is the world that we've been enduring since we've been born into this nation. And when you think about what happened in Minneapolis, it brings all of it into sharp relief. Imagine that the comfort that that officer must have felt to be able to kneel on that man's neck and kill them publicly without even worrying about whether the cameras were on them or not. Imagine the comfort of even the officers of color who sanctioned that behavior by protecting that officer from the citizens. That is a system that definitely does not love its people. Ladies and gentlemen, this nation is not going to heal if it can't love its people. When I say love its people, not just love corporations, not just love wealthy folks, but love all of its people, that 100 million that I'm talking about. You might think love is a soft word, but you see what the opposite of love is every day in our design of our institutions. Our police departments have built up a strong legal and regulatory framework to protect them so that they can behave that way. You see them now beginning to beat white women, white children in the streets of Portland and other places now because they do not love their people. What was once relegated for just Black and brown bodies now is open season for everyone. And even for those who have said, you know, hey, I have no skin in this game. I don't need to be worried about all these issues. You know, if you live in Florida and even in California in some places, in other cities around this country, you never thought that the unemployment system wouldn't work for you, that it wouldn't be efficient and effective. But if you read some of the exposés in Florida as an example, you'll see where the prior governor actually designed the system so that it would not work. So that it would not work because of that untrue, but yet powerful racist trope of the Black welfare queen. And so we thought that, you know, I don't want those people to get anything, so I'll design a system that is ineffective and really doesn't work, so they won't be able to use it. And now look who's getting swept up in that anti-Black racism, who never thought they had a dog in that fight. Those small business owners who need relief. Those middle-class folks, whether they're white, Black, Asian, Latinx, or whatever, who never thought that that was their issue. Now they get to see what it looks like to see structural oppression hiding in plain sight. They get to see what it looks like to see structural oppression hiding in plain sight when systems are not designed to be liberating, but are designed to be harmful, to be oppressive. Now, I just wanted to share this context with you because this is where the heat is coming from in this moment. And this heat is also coming from a moment where, quite frankly, government is unable to respond at a scale that is necessary. And you see that all the time. Can't even get out PPPs in a way where you get the money to the small business owners, those who really need it. Can't even get out PPEs. Can't even provide for the general health and safety of the people who live in this country. And the nonprofit sector has a tax code that, quite frankly, is restrictive of its ability to change the legal and regulatory framework of this nation. So that's why I say corporations aligned with the nonprofit sector, aligned with government, is at the leading edge of the equity movement. Something radically imaginative needs to happen right now. And that is for us to ask ourselves, what is the work that we must do to reconstruct and, if necessary, reimagine our institutions so that they serve everyone? And that's what I'm excited about right now. That's why I remain hopeful. You heard earlier folks talking about that the movement for Black Lives is one of probably the largest movement that this nation has ever seen. That is an exciting opportunity because it didn't get large just by Black people. It got large by the beautiful diversity of folks who are stepping out of their comfort zones and standing in transformative solidarity with Black folks. That is powerful. That is powerful. But not only is it happening in the streets, I could tell you stories of white leaders who have transformed their organizations because they went on their own journey. They did their own work and they were committed to transforming their organizations. I watched them do it in less than 3 years on average. And that's what keeps me hopeful, that I think we now have reached a critical mass where we're not just having to say, will you please just acknowledge the history of what has happened so that then maybe we can craft strategy to move forward. It seems like we're starting to level up a little bit on the understanding of the legacy of harm that we have in this nation. And we're also leveling up on that we are not paralyzed by that we actually can be as revolutionary as the founders of this nation, that we can be as highly creative as they were at designing a system. We can strengthen our government and our democracy so that they work for folks. That is the legacy for our generation. And so if you want to know what you can do in this moment, there's a couple of things that you can do to meet this moment. First is to be afraid and to be uncomfortable. We all are. This is an uncomfortable moment. Do not wish for that to go away. The respite is in the fire right now. The respite is in the fire of liberating this nation for everyone. That's where you're going to find the peace and the comfort, in the solidarity of other folks who are in this struggle with you. So that's the first thing. Do not try to run away from it. Walk into it because that is what is needed. And so the first thing you can do is actually level set on how this nation was designed. The good and the bad. Because there is complexity there and we can hold it all, the good and the bad. Own it. Own it. And then second, listen to the people who are aggrieved and in pain. Listen to them. They are not reacting simply because they are angry or crazy. They are reacting to systems that are harming their children, their families every single day. Listen. Do not try to overlay your own understanding on it, because if you're not being oppressed like this, you probably can't understand the magnitude of the hurt and the pain. Do not try to overlay your understanding on it. Try to understand from their perspective. Empathize with what they are telling you and understand it enough that you will do the most important step to begin to take some actions. You say, now, what are some of those actions that we can take? The first is we can acknowledge our history. We can begin to atone for it. And where, if our institutions have been culpable in any of this, where can it begin to make some efforts to repair the breach? Those don't have to start off as grand gestures. It could just start off with a really authentic, heartfelt apology and move on to other things. But that is a transformative start. It is a transformative start. But if you are a leader of an institution right now, your voice is desperately needed, because the movement for Black Lives has done its part, but it can only do so much. That energy from the street, the way we honor that movement is to bring that energy into our organization now and to transform them so that they work for everyone. So when you say, where do you start? One of the things I always tell people is, if you have not read the Movement for Black Lives platform, you should read it, because what we've asked of young people, they have done. They have brought their brilliance, their passion, their deep intellect to crafting an inclusive agenda. You can look at any one of their pillars and pick one and just figure out where you want to contribute. That's where you start. But where you shouldn't start is to discount their work and go do your own thing. Because that is the maintenance of a system that has the privilege to ignore the voice, wisdom, and experience of the people who are telling you what they need, and then we go do something else. You've seen that recently happen in this nation. You saw corporations put over $1 billion in the street over the last probably 30 to 60 days. And while that was needed, much of it was not results-based. Much of it was performative. And what scares me about that is the same folks who just, in an unaccountable way, put that $1 billion out on the street, really not asking, well, what indicator would it move? How will it change those structural things around policing that we're talking about? They'll blame Black people in 5 years because things haven't gotten better and we spent $1 billion. And that's the danger. And as I saw that $1 billion go out, I said to myself, I wonder how much of that money went to the Police Union Bill of Rights, the Police Union contract, and working to revise or get rid of qualified immunity. Those are 3 structural barriers to making significant police reform. And so what I'm asking you to do is that our money now must be aligned with dismantling and replacing these structures. Say, defund the police and think of another system of community safety. But when you think about how policing was designed, it wasn't designed for community safety. It was actually to be of control of Black bodies. And you still see that playing out today. So when you go back to the original origin story, this is what I mean by what's baked in your DNA. Community safety from police has never really been a thing for Black and brown folks. And if white families had to tell their child, you know what, at a certain age, if you see a police, you have to do this in order to protect yourself from the possibility of being killed. That structure would not exist. That structure would be gone in a heartbeat. It would be gone in a heartbeat. It wouldn't even be a debate. The standard would be, if you are harming my child, that system is unloving and it must be dealt with. But yet when it comes to Black and brown bodies, it's a 20, 30, 40, 50-year debate and nothing changes. That's why people are angry. That system wasn't designed for community safety for Black and brown folks. It was designed for community safety and economic benefit of white America. And that's how you see it playing out all across this country. When small towns, given my time at HUD, actually use the development of jails as an economic development strategy. Think about that for a moment. When small towns are using prisons as their economic development engine, you are basically creating a pipeline of slavery. When private prisons are negotiating with states for guaranteed occupancy, this is real, folks. When private prisons are negotiating to build in a place that can guarantee the bodies, that is not community safety. That is a system that is very clearly said, I have to maintain it myself. I have to feed myself. So I will construct a set of laws that will allow me to do just that. That is, in essence, what Black and brown folks and those poor white folks are upset about. That economic system is oppressing them. Now, we can be bigger than our statements. We can be bigger than our statements. And you see folks doing it now. You see folks in every sector beginning to make sure that their frontline workers actually have a living wage pay, that they have consistent hours so that they can schedule around them, that they have the childcare supports that they need. You see folks diversifying their boards. You see states mandating it in some cases. You see people creating space in our organizations for that dissenting voice to be able to safely dissent without retaliation. You see us beginning to talk about the ways in which systems need to change. We're beginning to talk about the policy implications of what is needed. And that's why I said I'm not on the political spectrum, folks. Around the world, people have shown us, other countries, women who are leading other countries have shown us what is working. It's evidence-based, and we can decide if we want to look at that stuff and do some of it, or we don't have to. But the beauty is this. You are bigger than your statements. You are bigger than your statements. And you'll be bigger than your statement if you can find a contribution that is in alignment with what this moment is and what oppressed peoples all around this country have asked of you. Now, as I close, I'll share a couple of things. I don't believe institutions deserve to exist if they will not do what the moment requires. And I want you to ask yourself, do you deserve to exist still? Simply because you have a good brand, simply because you have a dynamic leader that can still attract the investment. And yet, on the impact side, you are afraid to wade into the fire. Do you deserve to exist still? I don't believe you do. I don't believe PolicyLink deserves to exist. This is why. As I begin to close, I'll share with you some of our own personal examples of how we take this work in. This is why I said I'm on my own personal journey. We've centered the 100 million in America living at 200% of poverty as our population that we want to impact. Some people will say that's bold and ambitious. It is, and that's what's needed right now. And some folks would say, well, Michael, as a national organization, how do you measure that? It's hard, and that's the work that we got to do. But what I know is this. PolicyLink doesn't deserve to exist if it's just going to keep putting out reports and saying how bad it is. PolicyLink doesn't deserve to exist if all it's got is 20 more webinars every quarter. PolicyLink doesn't deserve to exist if all it's got is several more papers. PolicyLink doesn't deserve to exist if it's just got a convening. PolicyLink needs to use its brand and its political capital and its resources to be in service of this moment, of this movement. And if it will not do that, we should get out of the way and let our dollars go to folks who want to have this fight right now. And what that has looked like is we've had to radically reset our portfolio to fight for this moment and to be creative and imaginative about what does that look like. It looks like us deciding we will take on some of this legal and regulatory stuff. We will fight to make sure that if we get a favorable administration, that there is a racial equity scoring of public policy, just like the CBO gives a score now. We will wade into those structural ways of trying to make sure that government is anti-racist. This is going to be hard work. It's going to be challenging work. It's going to have us taking a lot of heat, but it's some of the most exciting and creative work. And what I'm signaling to you is, when you weigh and when you hold the interest of entire populations and you actually expect that there is some contribution you can make to get a trend line going in the right direction, it will usher in a new level of creativity, and it will call into question probably the majority of the things that you've been doing. And that's what it's calling into question at PolicyLink. Not like that stuff was bad, but it was a different time. And we must continue to renew as institutions if we're going to have a strong democracy. We must continue to be a loving critic, as John Gardner calls us to be, of our organizations, so that they're of service in this moment. Now, it's also meant that I've got to find other places to recruit. Just as we can ask white America to diversify, I need to be asking myself, where do I find my transgender brothers and sisters? Where do I find my indigenous brothers and sisters? Where do I find folks who are returning citizens? Where do I find folks that just didn't go to the elite schools? This is what it means to have my own equity journey. That I don't get a pass just because our organization is a shop of 70, that is, looks like the United Nations. There's still more work for me to do. And even more important than attracting the talent, as we get into the culture, creating a culture where people can walk over that threshold and do their work, I can tell you, managing this diverse motley group of folks is probably some of the hardest work I've done. Because when you unleash that beautiful energy, it is tough to manage. It is tough to manage. It is brutal, but it is the work. And when it works, man, it works. But I have learned a few things about how to make sure you manage it. The first is to have work that is worthy of bringing in that type of talent, because they are going to want to work. And so if you don't want to be on the leading edge of the equity space, I wouldn't bring these folks in, because you will tear yourself apart as an organization. So to me, being grounded in a strong results frame that allows you to bring someone in who can make a contribution worthy of what is in their soul is probably one of the best lessons that I've learned. The second is to have a North Star about what the boundaries are. What the boundaries are. And when I talk about the boundaries, what I mean is this. It's one thing to be woke. It's another to think about how to lead in a way that you're holding all. I'll give you a subtle example. There's a big debate right now. People are capitalizing the B in Black in journalistic circles. And in some places, folks will say, well, you know, now we should lower the lowercase the white, the W in white, so that folks, because this represents the structural ways in which all the things I've talked about today manifest themselves. And I get that argument, but I also don't think that that argument is the right path forward because of this reason. Black and brown people will not get a chance to grieve and will not get a chance for retribution. We must manifest the grace necessary to just move forward. And that is probably one of the hardest pills to swallow when people don't see your humanity. But you know what? I don't actually have the luxury of lowercasing that W. Because if I do that, I am replicating what the tools of the oppressor has done to me. That is not equity, and that ain't a path forward. It might make for a brilliant intellectual argument, but it's not the path forward. And we've got to be really clear about being woke and holding equity and the grace that is necessary to hold equity, to move this nation forward so that it can heal. And I'm signaling this because this is a tough thing for people of color. We will not get a chance to fully heal before we are called into helping this nation move on. And I want white America to understand how much of a hard pill that is to swallow when folks still can't say Black people, still can't say poor Asians, still don't care about those immigrants at the border. It is hard to want to have grace when people don't see your humanity. And nevertheless, in this moment, we are holding all of these complexities and these tensions, and we are finding a way forward. And that's why I'm hopeful and I'm excited to be here with you today. And I'm asking you as I close, what will your legacy be? To create a nation, a democracy, and an economy that actually works for everyone. Imagine how radical that is and how it's in this nation to say, you know what? We actually can have a nation that works for the 100 million and has a healthy corporate environment as well. We can hold both of those. If we can get rid of this hierarchy of human value in this nation, we can hold both of those. We have money for the things that we want to have money for. What I'm asking you to do is to not dim your light based on what is possible because of your grant funding or what's right in front of you. I'm asking you to think about the shoulders that you stand on of your ancestors, our ancestors, who had far less and did so much more. One day I was complaining about some stuff and a mentor of mine said, you know, Michael, I don't believe Rosa Parks sat down because she got a grant to do that. And it really stung when the person said that to me. But what they were saying to me was quite powerful. You really need to recognize all that you really do have and what's been set up for you, the battles that have been won for you. And now that we are on the precipice of realizing the promise of equity, this is not the time to back down, to try to reduce our work to just what is possible. It is time for our visions to soar, for our ability to execute to be on point, and for us to really realize that if we can hold the vision that every person in this nation deserves a structure, a democracy, and an economy that doesn't harm them, that doesn't oppress them, that allows them to prosper, we will realize the promise of equity, and you will have lived into being bigger than your statements. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions and join you there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. McAfee. That was amazing. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to get to those. We have about 25 minutes. So the first question I'd like to ask you from our attendees is, please share the difference between performative activism and transformational leadership in the context of racial equity work. Sure.
Performative activism is wearing t-shirts with empty words on them. Performative activism is putting out statements because the herd is putting out statements, and yet you don't want to do any of the work. You're still afraid to say people's names. Performative activism is when you're in the comfort of your own peer circles, you don't fight for liberation. Performative activism is you have a wonderful grant portfolio in your corporation, and yet your lobbying side is restricting democracy, so my grandmother has to stand in line for 6 to 8 hours to vote. That is the performative work. When our actions and the results that we want are really actually working against each other. That's what it means. Get rid of the t-shirts, get off Twitter, get off Instagram, live in the real damn world and change the laws and the structures that are oppressive. That's the work. If you're not doing that work, you're performing. If you're not doing that work, you're performing. Because what people are asking for right now is to be freed from this stuff that is harming them. And that's why I gave you 3 examples of policing. Qualified immunity, police union contracts, police union bill of rights. 3 structural examples. If you don't want to take those structures on, what are you doing? What are you doing? We don't need to talk about equity. You want to learn how to do equity? Do the work. That is evidence-based practice for adult learners. Adult learners learn best when they're solving a problem. You don't need to read a book. You don't need to find a person of color to help you with your learning journey. And even people of color, you don't need to read a book. What you need to do is join. Join with the folks who are at the leading edge of the work, those moms for housing in Oakland who are fighting for folks just to be able to stay in this city. Join with them. You'll learn what it means to do equity work. you'll quickly see the structures of oppression that I'm talking about. Those folks at the homeless encampments in Oakland, join with them. You'll see all the barriers and how you can't take a bath on the street. You can't sit on the sidewalk on the street. You can't ask for help on the street. If you're homeless in this city, what the hell can you do without going to jail? This is an example of what performative looks like. The wokeness, and yet so empty. And this is why I said, get off the political spectrum, because you're not doing any of us any favors by acting like you're woke, whether you're black, white, brown, Asian, whatever. This is a results-based moment, and we must be able to stand account for our impact of improving the lives for the 100 million.
Thank you.
Maria, I think you were getting ready to say something else?
Yes. So what's the biggest mistake a white leadership team can make right now with the Black community?
Not really doing any work and asking for folks to help them. Not really wanting to humble themselves enough to actually listen. And what I would say is this: what we're asking of white America is no different than what men have to deal with to reprogram ourselves from our toxic masculinity. And so I'll use my own self as an example. If I want to join and be in solidarity with women, I don't start by wanting to debate them about their experiences. I don't start by wanting to haggle over what they're saying, because it may not work with the way I see the world. It won't. It's not my experience. My job is to join. My job is to see those structures of oppression that they're telling me about and do something with them in my own organization. Like, very simple, making sure that women get paid just as much as men do, or others. I could easily do that if I choose to. Making sure that they are actually in the most senior positions. I actually have the authority to do that. And so here is what the worst thing you can do as a white person right now is to perform, but you don't want to make the commitment. Because here's what I know: we're already authorized to do something as leaders. The things that I just told you that I do, I didn't have to ask permission to make sure that women are paid equally. I didn't have to ask permission to find folks who just didn't go to the top tier schools. I didn't have to ask permission to make sure that folks who are others, identify as others in our organization, feel safe and comfortable. I didn't have to ask for permission. I didn't have to ask for permission to recently figure out, okay, how do we find some tutors and others who can help our staff who's going to have some struggles right now with kids not going back to school? I'm already authorized to love my staff. I'm already authorized to love my staff. The question is, will I do that? And that's what, whether you're black, white, brown, whatever, this is a moment where we shouldn't get caught up on the black and white paradigm so much. Everybody needs to ask themselves the question: where are you loving the rest of the folks in your organization and creating space for them? This ain't just a white problem. They got their work to do too. But this is an everybody problem. All of us in positions of leadership need to be struggling to figure out these equity pathways in. So what I would say is, don't start conversations if you don't want to do any work right now. Don't start conversations or try to take steps if you're not going to want to be pushed, or if you're not going to want to experience some of that anger that people still hold, because you're going to get some of that, and rightfully so. And our job right now as leaders is to exercise the highest level of emotional intelligence, even when it's hard. And trust me, that's why I'm telling you, managing a diverse organization is harder than anything you've ever done. And sometimes it is an ungrateful and thankless endeavor. And it's the right work. And it's some of the most gratifying work at the same time. So that's what I would say.
So this next question is a little bit long, but I think it's important to ask. So per your statement regarding corporate America's role in the design treatment, based on their ability to bend or shape the legal and statutory, please speak in terms of changes in accountability in corporate leadership and their relationships with communities of color. For example, Facebook's obligation to protect vulnerable communities while protecting free speech of 3.8 billion subscribers. Transforming representation of boardrooms, supplier vendors, diversification to support Black and Brown communities, community engagement efforts. Oops, oh, sorry, hold on. Somebody wrote another question and it popped me out of, all right, I lost the rest of the.
No, I understand what you said.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So what I would say is this: this is probably the example of DEI that I've ever seen. Corporate leaders are some of the most results-based and accountable people that I've ever seen. And yet when it comes to this topic, they are the most learned, helpless folks I've ever seen. You live in a world of quantitative measurement. I don't know anyone who deserves to keep their job if they can't find one woman to put on a board in 20 years. I don't know anyone who can, with Black women being the most educated group in this country, I don't know why you deserve to keep your job if you can't find Black folks to be in tech or to be in some of these other industries. See, this is where you got to stop bullshitting yourself and just call what you want. If you just are comfortable, if you just are comfortable being around your own folks and that's really what you want, then just call it. But stop acting like it's a skills gap problem. Stop acting like you don't know where these people exist, because you wouldn't survive at Facebook talking about you don't know how to think of the next thing. The people at Facebook are hired because they can see what nobody else sees and find it and create it. And yet you can't find folks standing right in front of your damn face. This is real talk, folks. This is why people are angry. You can send a damn rocket to the moon and bring it back, but you can't find one Black person? Come on. You're not going to change this society when you're allowing such unaccountable behavior. And it's just not tolerated. We should not tolerate it. Black, brown, Latinx, Asian folks, whatever. You know, the reality is this: if I want to do it, I'll find it. If I care about it as a CEO, I will make a way. I will make a way. So this is where some of those basic values of leadership you just need to go back to, probably from the days if you were in Boys and Girl Scouts or something else. The reality is this: you got to stand account and be accountable. You're not going to change this work by talking shit, because people already see through it. And this is why I'm telling you, if you don't want to do this work, just be quiet, because you're wasting your money and you're further burnishing your already damaged presence, because people see right through it. You're the only one that doesn't see it. People see right through it. And the stuff that you see happening in tech right now is a perfect example. The stuff that you see happening in other corporations is a perfect example. 20 years to find someone, 20 years to diversify your board, it's all bullshit. You've never wanted to do it. And you expect us never to get mad at you for playing with us. The beauty now is, this is what this heat on the street is. It is a reckoning now. This next generation has inherited this revolution from its ancestors, and they ain't gonna tolerate this shit. And you can either understand that or you cannot, but this is what it means for people to exercise their power. A lot of folks in our sectors like to talk about power and agency and how do we create it. You don't need to create it, because you're getting ready to feel it. You're getting ready to feel it from generations who are now fed up. And that is what I'm trying to help you, guard you against. You're getting ready to feel it. Shareholders are getting ready to help you feel it. These young folks in the streets are getting ready to help you feel it. And that's the beauty right now. And so what I'm asking you to think about is diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't need you necessarily bringing someone in to handhold you if you're unaccountable. You don't need to hire another Black person, person of color, or woman to serve in as your diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. You've wasted your money. You wasted your money. I can't tell you how many of those folks we work with who have no direct access to the C-suite, no direct access to any other areas of the value chain. And so they're a person walking around in an organization like a zombie trying to do the best they can. And most of what they end up doing is just show and tell. Let's have a lunch where we share diverse meals and show the different foods of the world. Oh, bullshit. That's not what we're asking for. Save your money. That's performative. That's performative. And lastly, the thing I'll say is this. This is the beauty of this moment. No one's asking you to do anything. The beauty of this moment is we're going to take care of ourselves. So whether you're Black and don't get it, you're white or don't get it, you're Asian or don't get it, Latinx or some other and don't get it, it doesn't matter. You're irrelevant at this point. And if you don't get anything about this revolution right now, you don't have to get it anymore. Because the world has finally caught up with the hopes and aspirations of our ancestors. And these young people have it. Your organization will be irrelevant. You don't have to do anything anymore. This is where you can say, we are all of us. Those of us who choose not to lead in this moment, we are going to be relieved of our duties, whether we know it or not. And this is no different than in corporations where you misread the market and before you know it, you're out of business. This is the same thing. This is a market-making moment. It's a market-making moment or it's an organization-destructive moment. Choice is ours. But what I'm asking you to think about, if you want to be on a DEI journey, the first thing you do is declare the results that you want to achieve. If you will not declare the result that you want to achieve, and you will not establish a measurement of progress, you are bullshitting. And you need to call it, because you do not behave this way in any other aspect of your organization. So what I'm asking you to do is please stop the disrespect. And because what you're doing is you're then making people see D&I as a scam. No, it's not a scam. The people are the scam who are continually trying to use the language without having to commit to the work. And so this is why, and what I'm signaling to you, and I'm not angry right now, I'm just extremely passionate about this stuff for this very reason. It's a gift to be able to talk to you. And so one of the things I'm doing is showing up the way I think leaders need to show up in this moment. I didn't get on this call with you this morning to waste your time and give you a bunch of platitudes. I'm trying to tell you what the work is for this moment so that you can never say that Michael just wanted to be your friend so he could be worried about his next job and whether you're going to love him or not. That's not my interest right now. My interest is making sure that if no one else tells you what the work is, that you've heard it from me. Whether you like me or not, love me or not, that's your choice. And this is what I mean about being afraid and uncomfortable, because many of you might just want to say, I'll never want to hear that dude again. That's the reality of living dangerously in the work right now. But I do not honor the work by using my privilege to play games with you and not tell you the truth. And it does have a consequence. It has a personal consequence. It has a professional consequence. It has a psychological and a physical consequence. And you have to decide whether you want to accept it or not. And I'm at peace with that. What else you got?
So we hear this a lot, that, we're a dominant white community here. So we have a lot of employees that are often passionate about this work, but their management is not. I know you've talked a lot about leaders, but how can an employee help move the needle when their management isn't bought in?
Well, this is one where I would say it is really hard because structures of oppression are harmful to folks who don't have power. They just are. And what I've always decided to do is to never, I was always bigger than my job description in my head, and I was never going to die in my cubicle. So I believe that if you've got God-given gifts in you that got to get out, you go where you can find some place where those gifts can be liberated. That's what I've always chosen to do. Because if this, and so what that also means is I never let someone interview me. Never, ever, ever. Doesn't mean I don't participate in the interview, but I'm trying to decide if I want to work with you. And I'm going to test for these things. I'm not going to get caught up in the seduction of personality, where we went to school, and what city did we grow up in. I'm trying to have a conversation around strategy and results so I can see if you are committed to that. And this is what I would say to others. Because sometimes you're just not going to move management in the time that you need to. And what I always say to people is look at it as like relationships. You can spend a whole lot of years with folks who never loved you. And that's fine as long as you're not going to blame everybody else for the decision that you made. And I feel this work is the same. You don't have to stay at any corporation. You all are brilliant and talented, and you can take your gifts somewhere else. There's a space for them. Your job is to not live in fear and to go find them. What it meant for me is I got fired in Kansas City. Had to move to DC and trying to recreate my life. Ultimately landed in Chicago. Maxed out with what I could do at HUD and had to decide to let go of the security of what my parents had always told me, which was, baby, just get that good government job and stay there. Now to come into a nonprofit world where I'm talking like this, which makes me be in a highly perilous and vulnerable world and position. But I would never have had the ability to do all of the things that I've done over the last 9 years. And let me tell you, when I was in my 20s and got fired, it was one of the best things that happened for me, because it made me choose who did I care about. I was probably one of the only Black men ever hired at the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. And overnight, I went from poverty to a star because of my proximity to money and power. When a nonprofit was struggling and I asked to be loaned out to turn it around, I went from a star to an angry Black man overnight, and they sent me to talk to a woman named Dr. Dottie Fanninstill for 6 months because they thought I was angry and they didn't know how to manage me. But they thought I was angry because I had the audacity to say, you know what? These after-school programs are not in alignment with the quality standard of what we're seeing from Karen Pittman and Richard Murphy and others who were creating the youth development field at that time. And the problem with that is that I was making elites choose between their loyalties between me and their loyalties with each other. I lost. I was right on the issue, but I lost because I wasn't politically savvy enough to manage it. It was the best gift because it made me clear. It was clear to me at that point. All I needed to do was just shut up, and I could be at the White House, wherever I wanted, because I was in those spaces. But to be confronted with having to choose, and really you can talk, this is what I mean by talking that woke shit and actually having to prove it. That was a moment where I had to decide, I'm not even 30 yet in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm making nearly $100,000 and I've been coming out of poverty. All I needed to do was be quiet. And I could have been that Black face that everybody loved. It's not the choice I made. And then I moved to PolicyLink, and I'm coming up out of the stairs of Penn Station in 2012, and I have to sit down because I'm short of breath. And I'm like, man, I know I'm in shape. What is wrong? What was wrong was I had just come to PolicyLink in late 2011, early 2011. And like I said, I had been on the road 60% of the time, traveling all over the country. Ultimately discovered that I had a blood clot. One will kill you, but multiple of them, it had broken up into multiple blood clots in both of my lungs. I'm sitting in GW Hospital in DC. I'm in DC for a month because I couldn't fly back. And my wife comes out and she's all nervous and crying or whatever. And I'm sitting in the hospital and I'm like, I am actually in a really good place right now. I'm actually in a really good place because I'm not saying to myself, oh God, please give me another day because now I'll finally do what you blessed me to do. I was sitting there saying, I'm actually good. I ain't ready to check out because I still got more work to do, but I'm actually good because I'm doing what my vocation is. And it was, again, another one of those moments where you really get to see if the shit you talk lines up with the reality when you're in these situations. And while my wife kept saying, Michael, will you please shut up about that? I couldn't, because I was so happy to know that this is my life. This is my work. And my job is to guard my vocation, not to be reckless in it, but also be extremely strong in it. And that's hard as a Black man who is tall, to show up this way when folks don't often get to interact with this energy. And so in many cases, they just see it as a threat when it's actually not. It's just love and passion. And so I share that story with you because that's how I deal with the management issue. I choose to find my own place where my gifts can be liberated. I don't leave that to anyone else. I don't leave it to a promise. I don't leave it to a guarantee. I leave it to what am I actually able to do at this moment? And when I've had enough, I leave. When I had enough of HUD, I left. That's what you do. If you do not do that, you will become a slave to an organization that does not love you, and you will waste your gifts away.
So another question is, how can or should we address individuals, our employees, who are so angry that they don't even want to engage in any conversations? Do you have some tips?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes a leader's job is not to worry about everybody. You know, my mentors always taught me to manage the thirds, a third who are with you, a third who might get with you, and the third who just don't give a damn. And I'm not spending my time with the third who just doesn't give a damn. This ain't their moment. They've had their moment for 400 years. So I don't care if they get it. And this is what it means for us to step into our power now. I'm not trying to appease you no more. You've got a world that appeases you. And leaders must show up to say that. I'm not taking anything away from you. So it's fine if you want to sit there and not do any work. Life is going to pass you by. We're going to do this work, though. You cannot hold the work hostage to this type of inertia. That is white supremacy at its finest. It is at its finest when it's able to block action simply by doing nothing. You cannot tolerate that. You do not have to try to convert that. You do not have to fight with that person. Do the other work first. You can get back to this person later. Better yet, you know what? If you do the right work, they'll leave. And you never had to say a word. To me, that's love. Love is, I don't have to fight with you. I don't have to fight with you right now. But what I expect for you to do is to get out of the way of the all. To get out of the way of the all. And if you don't want to do that, then my job as a leader is to help you find another place to go work. And this is the tough reality. If we just do our work. Yeah, so what I would say is, you know, I see it all the time. But what I know is this, I'm going to tell you this story to make this point. Angela Glover Blackwell, one of the most revolutionary sisters I know, founded PolicyLink. And imagine how it must have felt for the first 15 years to not even be able to talk about race as forcefully as you wanted to, because the world told you no. And then imagine over the last 5 years, people finally came to wanting to start talking about equity and race. And they say, but they don't still want to do the work. And now she's retired, or she's the founder in residence. But I grieve for her. I grieve for her because I'm like, man, this is one of the most brilliant sisters I know, and she had to spend the majority of her career paving a way for me to be able to stand on her shoulders and be able to lead in this way. And I wonder how she feels about that. I wonder how much that hurts her, that she couldn't fight for her people the way she wanted. I'll be damned if I'm going to do that. She's already won that for me. She's already paid that price for me. And I really want you to think about what I just said to you. This is another example. 20 years, Angela started the concept of equity. The world has come to it now. And the majority of the time, people were telling her, don't talk about this. And let me tell you why this is such an important moment. Because right as equity was getting hot, maybe about 5 years ago, there was a person, a white man, who sat at the nexus of a lot of money and power and philanthropy, who had signaled that he wanted to partner with us. We started doing all the work to partner. And he then ghosted us. And so as equity became hot, he came back to PolicyLink, brought his Black folks with him, of course, and sits down. And in all of his bravado, he just says, hey, you know, we ought to partner. And so I had told Angela I wasn't going to the meeting because if I don't have anything nice to say, I don't need to waste my political capital. And I was going to call him out on his behavior. And so I said, Angela, this is one of those times that if you really don't want to see some major conflict, I need you to use all your amazing grace and say something. And Angela says to him as he begins to first talk and sit back in his chair and says, hey, you know, we ought to partner now. Angela, if you all know Angela Glover Blackwell, as only she can do with all her grace, she says to him, I'm sorry, I can't move forward until I understand why you disrespected us so bad. Of course we want to partner, but I just need to understand this so we can move forward. His face gets red. You could see the Black folks in the room like, oh, his staff, like, oh, here we go. And the gentleman leans forward and he says, you know, sorry, Angela, I just didn't think equity was important. And to this day, he probably does not understand the power of that statement. What he was basically saying is, you all are so freaking irrelevant. I don't even have to pay attention to your ass unless I want to. When I say it's so, so it will be so. And I was like, wow, that's white supremacy. When you think it's so, it will be so. And so I'm not talking to you philosophically. I'm telling you real world examples of how these journeys play out. Now that gentleman is really on his a real authentic journey, and it's probably made one of the most profound transformations I know. But I'm telling you that story because this person still sits at the nexus of power and money. And he held up the equity movement really for 10 years because he didn't give a damn. We could be so much further if he had gave a damn, because he's that powerful. And so this is what it looks like. Now, PolicyLink kept on doing its work, thank God. But I'm sharing that story because that is what Black and brown people and women deal with every day. That's what we deal with every day. And so this is why you see me showing up with this intensity, because we can no longer I can't help the 100 million if I'm dealing with folks who are still like, I don't even have to be in a relationship with you to even understand what you're saying. You're so irrelevant to me, even though we're colleagues and you're doing something that is moving in the sector and transforming it. I don't find it to be relevant. And so I'm sharing these stories so that you can see for yourself. How does these stories show up in your behavior? And today, we still work with this person. I'm friends with the person on a professional level. And this is what I mean when you don't get to ignore people, because the work requires that we work together. And I'm grateful that this person is on its own journey now, because it makes it a lot easier. But this is what it looks like when I'm talking about the work for our generation. We all got to do it. And I'm asking you to find your own voice, your own style, so that you can hold the love, the grace, and the fire that is necessary to bring about equity.
Dr. McAfee, I am so sorry that we are out of time. And I think our attendees I've gotten a couple of text messages about it's too short. So thank you so much for being here, sharing your amazing insights into addressing the structural oppression that is hiding in plain sight. We all need to learn and acknowledge our history to move forward, to be able to look at our policies and lovingly be a critic and make changes for the better. So you give me a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure our attendees as well. We should all be thinking about our own personal legacy and our organization's legacy in doing this work. So just really appreciate you and appreciate you being here. So I want to thank Cambia Health Solutions again for sponsoring today's Breakfast for Champions, and all of you for taking the time. And again, I'm sorry we started a little bit late. So diversity and equity work is a continual process that we must all commit to in the long run. I look forward to seeing you at our upcoming programs. So August 12th is Bias in Hiring, and August 26th is Using Data to Advance Equity. And finally, please take a few moments to send us your feedback. A link to a short survey will appear after you leave this webinar. It's going to be, and it's being posted in the chat box right now. So your feedback is very important to us. And again, thank you for being here, and I hope to see you soon. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.